Fate, Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 31-33. Chapter 31. Phone Home. Ritska Group Pav. There it is. Soler came to a stop, pointing in the direction of the fort. Forum Claudii Valenzium. The capital of the region. Ritska came to a stop next to him, breathing a little heavier than normal but otherwise no worse for wear. Looks. He narrowed his eyes at the walls, all of which looked damaged, looks beat up. Yes, it is, Soler muttered, moving his hand towards his sword. Tread lightly. He looked over to the young master. What can Sir Arash see? Arash. Ritska called out to his archer through their link. Walls are looking pretty beat up, can you see any Romans? Yep. The archer replied in affirmative. I can see a few helmets on the walls, looks like they're on patrol. They haven't spotted up yet. Arash says there are still Romans there. Soler let out a sigh of relief. Most fortunate then. He chuckled. Come, we must move quickly, and I suspect I will need to explain the appearance of Lady Quelaag. Yeah, Ritska cringed, with the Romans presumably fighting spiders for God knows how long, having another, larger, spider turn up might set off a few alarms. Soler signaled the company to advance, he Romans marching into file as the group advanced along the walls. By the time they got to within a few hundred meters of the wall, they had been spotted by the Roman sentries. Ritska could barely make out the shouting before he saw more helmets appear atop the wall, many of the Romans seen wielding bows and what looked like slingers. Mash, Ritska whispered over to the girl in a slight panic. She took that as her cue to stand slightly in front of her master in the event that the Romans unleashed a barrage upon them. Well, this has certainly got the makings of a warm greeting. Quelaag dryly put, moving up next to Ritska and Mash, causing the former to freeze up and stare off into the distance and the latter to send the woman a disapproving frown. The woman smirked in response, clearly aware of the effect she was having on the young man. Hold! A voice cried out from the wall, identify yourselves. Prefect Soler of the 2nd Legion of Rome. The Sun Knight called back, along with Centurions Magnus and Aulus of the 7th cohort. And the thing behind you. The same man cried back, sounding a little panicked. She is our guest. Soler struggled for the word before replying. I assure you, despite her appearance, she is not associated with the creatures who have attacked us. Wait there. The man cried back, then ran off out of sight, leaving the group of servants and Romans standing there for a few moments in awkward silence while the soldiers on the wall lined up their arrows. Think they're going to kill us, Prefect? Aulus asked. Soler sighed and shook his head. I most certainly hope not, Centurion. PFF'd. Quelaag snorted. If they could even harm me. You are not helping your case. Soler chided the woman. We are going to have to convince them of your usefulness. Is the fact I'm even here and not burning villages to the ground not useful enough? The woman raised an eyebrow at him. Soler palmed his helmet while Vrindari turned to her. The simple reason that I have yet to see why we should bother keeping you around is cause enough for you to consider your position. He growled at her, causing her to chuckle. My, quite the bloodthirsty little killer aren't you? Why you guys? Ritska turned to them with a frown, temporarily trying to shelve his fear of Quelaag's appearance. This isn't helping. Sir Vrindari, Quelaag is here helping us to begin with, at least give the benefit of the doubt. He pleaded, then turned to Quelaag and felt his heart rate speed up. Quelaag, please don't try and provoke Sir Vrindari. It's not helping anything. He trailed off, sweating and skin slightly ashen as Quelaag stared him in the eyes with a blank expression for a few seconds. HMPH. She grunted and looked away from him. Vrindari let out a scoff before his shoulders dropped ever so slightly, turning to Ritska and bowing his head. Apologies, my liege. I will attempt to put my personal feelings aside. Ritska gave him a shaky smile and then turned around, his somewhat stoic face immediately melting into one of obvious panic. Mash gave him a reassuring smile and gently rubbed the back of his shoulder. That went rather well. Ash hummed. Gareth smiled while she rode of Sif next to him. He looked up at her. Still. I am concerned about our position. I'm sure it will work itself out. Gareth shrugged. If not, well, we can always try and talk with the Olga lady again and see if she can get us there. So does the abyss make you see red? Beatrice suddenly popped up behind him, grin on her face, causing him to jolt at her sudden proximity to him. Confound it all. He cursed, looking over his shoulder at her. No, I do not see red. Oh. What about? Prefect Solaire. An older voice called out from atop the wall. I had heard your scouting party ventured into Gaulish territory. We thought you dead. I encountered these travelers. Solaire gestured to the Chaldean group, all of whom either waved or nodded their heads. They aided in our return. So I see. The man grunted. Are these the travelers the seer foretold? They are. And the man frowned, staring towards Quelaag, thing. Quote. The person of interest Keeper Cecilius sent me to find. I see. He nodded, then turned around, opened the gate. Let them through. He turned back. I shall meet you down below. We have much to discuss, Prefect. The man quickly retreated from the wall. The other soldiers atop quickly began scrambling to open the gate, the large doors slowly beginning to open up to them. The group watched the fort revealed to them with slightly relaxed expressions. You had best come with me, young Ritska. Solaire explained as they began to make their way into the city. It would be prudent to explain your arrival as well. Right. He nodded along, then turned to Mash and Ash. Let's go then. He looked over the rest of the servants. I guess you guys can take a break. Sure. Arash shrugged, dematerializing his bow and crossing his arms. I suppose I could do with a rest. What about you, Betty? He turned to the caster servant. The women let out a relieved sigh and nodded rapidly. Yes, please, no more fighting weird creatures. I will be here should you need me, my liege. Verndari nodded to him. Well, Ritska turned back to the other two. Let's get going. Aulus, Magnus. Solaire addressed the centurions. Return the men to the barracks. Tell them to relax themselves. Yes, Prefect. The pair echoed back before moving off to address the other Roman soldiers. Lady Quelaag, please remain with young Ritska's entourage. Solaire asked. The woman let out an amused scoff and looked in Verndari's direction. It's amusing you think I have a choice. She bitterly chuckled. I doubt that one would allow me out of his sight. All the same. Solaire asked. It would likely make the others feel more comfortable. He pointedly looked in the general direction of the surrounding soldiers, all of whom were glancing in the rider's directions with varying looks of open hostility or outright terror. HMPH. She grunted. I can put the little humans at ease. Thank you. Solaire nodded, then turned back to Ritska. Let us go, we shall see who we have to speak with. I am Legate Vespasian. The older man with gray patches of hair introduced himself. Solaire stood to attention as best he could while Ritska and Mash awkwardly stumbled to bow their heads. Ash had his arms crossed and stood in the corner, helmet removed and eyebrow raised. I arrived several days ago with the 6th Legion to reinforce this stronghold which had been placed under your care, only to find you had left on a scouting mission. Explain this, Prefect. Sir. Solaire began, when we received word from the Emperor of a vision from the Firekeeper, I felt it best to act upon this information immediately. With the knowledge of what we were facing, I believed that had anyone other than myself led the expedition to retrieve this individual, they would have died and the opportunity would be lost. Vespasian frowned but didn't argue the point, instead crossing his arms. The individual you mention. They are the creature outside. They are. Solaire nodded. Her name is Quelaag. She is a chaos witch. Witch. Vespasian closed his eyes and sighed. And you have evidence she is not in league with the creatures. When we encountered her, she was under assault by them. Solaire explained. Nor do I believe it was a ruse. The attack was far too lethal for that, and it was only after we lost a good deal of our number that we routed her attacks. On our journey back we were continuously harassed by spiders and other creations. Beasts made of the dead. Vespasian guessed. He assumed he was correct at Ritska and Mash's look of surprise. They were attacking us non-stop. Without the 6th Legion here, this city would have been overrun by now. I see. Solaire nodded. Were there any among their number which stood out? No. Vespasian nodded. If you refer to those like yourself who defy mortal means, then we were fortunate to encounter only Pluto's spawn. He looked over at Ritska, Mash and Ash, and these individuals. My company and I encountered them on our retreat back to this location. Solaire explained. Without the aid of young Ritska here, He pointed to the black-haired boy, and his comrades, we would have been lost. Vespasian nodded, then turned his sights on Ritska, the young boy freezing under the intense stare the Roman legate sent his way, and how fortunate it is that you and your companions were available. Ritska, a barbarian name. So tell me, why are you in Rome? Especially in these troubling times. We, Ritska coughed, were from a place called Chaldea. He began, we're here to help. Vespasian raised an eyebrow, and why is that? Well, Ritska scratched behind his neck, this isn't really. We are pursuing fugitives. Ash cut in, Vespasian looked in his direction, cueing for him to continue, one of them you have already seen the work of. The abominations made from the dead. Vespasian frowned at the memory, I see. He nodded, you are hunting down the criminals of this, Chaldea, who have ventured into Roman territory. He turned back to Ritska. He blinked, then nodded, yes. They weren't supposed to be here at all. As it stands they threaten Rome as a whole, so we are here to help deal with them. Vespasian took in a deep breath as he put on a thoughtful expression, tapping his hand on the desk for a few moments before he eventually nodded. I see. His eyes flickered back to Ritska, either way, the emperor will want to hear of Th. Ujimaru. Everyone in the room blinked at the crackling sound coming from Ritska's wrist. The boy in question went wide-eyed and looked down before holding it up. Fujamru. Can you read me? Vespasian raised an eyebrow, then looked over at Solaire, communication crystals. Something similar but different, legate. Solaire explained. Doctor. Ritska called back, pressing the communication, allowing for Romani's face to flash into existence. Said man immediately had a relieved look as he smiled at the young boy. Thank goodness. Romani sighed, we've been trying to reach you since your signal popped back up. You're in, he looked to the side, Martingi. Forum. Claudius. Ritska furrowed his brows, something like that. Forum Claudii Valenzium. Romani chuckled, but close enough. When the director said she made contact with you we were all relieved that you were alright. Well, Ritska cringed, as alright as I can be. He paused, can we add the director on? Romani blinked, oh. Then gaped like a fish, I should have done that to begin with, sorry. She's been hounding me for ages to get you back up. He looked to the side of the screen. I've been trying my hardest and Magi Mari has been telling me to stay strong but it's really difficult. Anyone else concerned that our operations chief and head of medical consults a VTuber for life advice? Ritska heard someone ask from the screen. Romani flinched and seemed to whirl on them. It's not that bad, Maxwell. Besides, Magi Mari has great advice to offer and stop laughing, Carrie. Vespasian stared at them, then turned to Solaire with an incredulous expression, and these are the people who will help us. They are good people. Solaire replied back with a nod. Vespasian only grunted in response and turned back to them. What is it now, Romani? Ritska heard the director's voice, it had never sounded so dead before. Director. Mash exclaimed, causing a second screen to pop up next to Romani revealing the white-haired woman. Mash. She blinked, somehow life returned to her eyes, then she looked at Ritska and coughed. Composing herself, Fujimaru Ritska. Mash. Ash. She nodded to the servant in the corner who waved at her. I see you have exited the area of interference. Good work. Director, Solaire-san said you were with the Emperor. I am. Olga replied in a tired voice. I also encountered 3 more servants. She explained, a berserker outside, some form of metal golem, a caster by the name of Cecilia, and one called Pontiff Sullivan. What? Ash asked in a dark tone, stepping away from the wall and approaching her. Sullivan. He's there. He is. Olga nodded. He also informed me of your past relationship. He is scum. Ash replied, you should have him killed now. Convince the Emperor that he cannot be trusted. It's more complicated than. He is the Pontiff of Aldrich. Ash scoffed, crossing his arms. You have the servant of our foe in your camp. He is no doubt passing reports to his master as we speak. He is. Olga cringed. It is more complicated than that. Suffice to say, I do not believe he is working with the enemy servant. And how do you know this? Ash asked. Did he tell you? Did he offer his assurances that he would not betray you? I suspect he offered similar oaths to Gwyndolin as well. Solaire blinked at the name, looking towards Ash in confusion. I was informed by Castor that, currently, Sullivan appears to be true to his word. Oh. Ash almost laughed, and who is this oh so wise Castor? Well, is that Milord's voice I hear? The gentle tone of a woman called out from the screen. Ash blinked in surprise and gaped like a fish at the familiarity. Olga stood to the side as a woman moved next to her, dressed in dark clothes with a metal mask covering her eyes. She smiled and nodded her head. Milord, to hear thy voice again is most pleasing. Firekeeper, Ash muttered under his breath, then his expression shifted into a gentle smile. I see you are well. Indeed. She nodded. The Emperor Nero has treated me most kindly. That is good to hear. He frowned. I am concerned about this talk of Sullivan however. His dealings and betrayal. I ask that thou place thy faith in me. She interrupted him, although not rudely. The false pontiff has spoke no ills thus far. It is mine belief he is not allied with the Lord of Cinder. Ash inhaled through his teeth, eyes darting off to the side as he debated something in his head before looking back at the firekeeper. You are certain? Milord, I am but a humble firekeeper. The woman smiled. It is mine role to serve thou, I would never willingly lead thou astray. Quote. Very well. Ash nodded. I shall withhold my judgment until I arrive. That is mine only request, milord. The woman smiled. I also believe I should inform thou that I have been granted a name by the Emperor. A name? Ash blinked, then nodded. Cecilia. I believe I heard. Indeed, milord. The woman nodded. Dith thou approve? It is a wonderful name. Ash nodded, smiling at her. There is also another matter concerning myself that must be discussed. Is that him now? A high-pitched excited voice called out from behind the firekeeper. The woman smiled and stood to the side to allow the newcomer to enter the frame. Romani seemed to cringe and there were several muffled laughs occurring just off-screen on his side. Ash, Mash and Ritska blinked in surprise as a grinning woman appeared on the screen, white eyes and hair in a bun. She appeared next to the firekeeper and looked around. Which one is he? She excitedly asked, then seemed to focus in on Ash. No, do not tell me. I shall guess. He is the tall handsome one. Quote. Excuse me. Ash raised an eyebrow, blinking in surprise. You are the Emperor Nero, I assume. Ah, you have heard of me. She grinned. Of course you have. Even visitors from afar have no doubt heard of the flower of Rome. Ash titled his head. You wished to speak with me. Indeed. Nero grinned. I want to have your permission to accept your servant into my bed. Ritska coughed violently, doubling over as his face went bright red and his eyes were wide. Mash clasped both her hands over her mouth and sent a worried gasp towards her master. Solaire looked away, suddenly finding the door to the room interesting while Vespasian seemed to find investigating his quills and inkpots amusing. As for Ash, his expression froze, still staring at Nero in an unblinking manner for several seconds while Ritska sounded as though he was dying. My word. Nero gaped. Is that young man all right? I'm sure he's fine, Emperor. Romani attempted to run damage control. He's probably just surprised by your blunt courtship and he stood up and walked away from the camera. Shut up. Stop laughing. Da Vinci. I can see you there. We're supposed to be a serious organization. We're going to look like idiots. Olga could be heard choking in the background, no doubt horrified at the clown show that was currently occurring in the Chaldea command room. Perhaps I misheard you. Ash replied. Would you repeat that? I wish to bed your servant. Nero replied in the same happy-go-lucky tone. She is a most exquisite flower and to find one who shares my beauty is a rare thing. I was hoping we could discuss it further when you arrived in Rome. Quote. Yes. Ash nodded, expression still fixed. That would be best. My emperor. Vespasian coughed. Ritska took that as his prompt to turn the screen to reveal the legate. Nero blinked then made an oh face. Legate Vespasian. I can see you. You are a tiny blue man. Quote. Indeed. The man coughed. I have established the 6th Legion in the territory of Alps Poenine, however attacks here have become increasingly more common. Nero nodded, a more serious expression on her face. I see, do you require more aid? Do you have another of Prefect Solaire's caliber? Vespasian asked. Nero cupped her chin. The Chaldeans are there, are they not? Vespasian nodded. Good, their leader is here and has already offered their aid to me as well. With the blessing of Fortuna, we shall solve this crisis quickly. I see. Vespasian nodded. Shall I have the Chaldeans supplied and escorted? Nero beamed. Have them escorted to me with a small contingent. Prefect Soler shall remain with you until we make ready our plans to push back. Yes, my emperor. Another thing, you, young man. Nero pointed towards Ritska. The boy blinked and gestured to himself. Me. Nero nodded. You have served with Pale Rose Olga, have you not? Ritska coughed. Pale Rose Olga. He parroted, the ghost of a smile appearing on his face. I am her subordinate, yes, he affirmed. Good. Nero nodded. Do you know how to win over her heart? Because she is most secluded with her. Ah. Olga cut her off with a desperate wail, pulling the screen away from the emperor and back to herself. Get here as fast as you can, Fujimaru. Hey. I was still talking to them. They've been informed of everything, they let go of that. You are being quite stingy. Pale Rose. Stop calling me Pale Rose and stop. Perhaps it would be best if thou do not. The screen cut off, leaving only Romani there. Romani. Ritska asked in a deadly serious tone of voice. Did you get all that? Senpai. Mash looked aghast. Romani nodded his head. I did. Doctor. Send it to me when I get back. Senpai, no. I'd rather not. The doctor winced. If the director finds out. Already done. A sing-song voice replied. A brunette woman with a cat-like smirk appeared behind Romani. Sup, kid. Name's Carrie. I sent it to your personal terminal. Thanks. Carrie. What have you done? Romani's head fell into his arms. Doctor, senpai. Mash admonished the pair, be serious. Ahem. Vespasian coughed. If you are quite finished. He looked at Ritska. I shall have horses ready for your departure within the next shift. Thank you. Ritska nodded, a relieved look on his face as he finished his communication with Chaldea, the blue screen shutting off. Now then, Mash, Ash. Let's. He trailed off, looking around. Where's Ash? He left shortly after Emperor Nero stopped speaking. Soler explained. He looked quite aggrieved. Oh. Sue. Gareth bounced on her heels. How long do you think they'll be? Sif just stared at her with a flat expression, one of his ears flicking, then looked away. Can you actually talk with him? Arash asked, looking genuinely curious as he stared between Gareth and Sif. The Lancer puffed out her chest and nodded. Of course. That is the bond between a jouster and their noble steed. Sif let out an amused snort, which only caused the girl to giggle and affectionately rub the wolf's head. Sif let out a pleased whine. Arash shook his head, chuckling as he did. Still, never would have expected to fight alongside a giant wolf before. He shrugged his shoulders, that's a new one. Ah, Sif is a fierce knight. Gareth boasted, he's just a large wolf instead of a person. She chuckled, then cupped her chin, although the king did keep a pet lion, perhaps. Really? Arash raised an eyebrow. Where do you even find a lion in Arthurian Britain? Apparently the king got them from a trader. Gareth shrugged, although the queen spent more time with them. Still, Arash shook his head, a lion of all things. What a bizarre court pet. He looked over at Verndari, leaning against a wall and staring at Quaylog. What about you, Verndari? Your king have any court pets? Verndari turned his head towards Arash briefly before turning it back. I was a newer entry to the king's court. It was after the war with the giants that I joined it. He shrugged. I never encountered a court pet, although one might have existed before I joined. Huh. Arash blinked. Oh well. What of you, Sir Arash? Verndari asked. Did you serve a king? I did. Arash nodded. King Manucher. And he was a warrior king. Arash explained. Descendant of the great hero Fereyudin. He crossed his arms and hummed, as far as can be said about him. Well, he was king. I was just a humble bowman. Gareth blinked, staring at him. Didn't you shoot an arrow over 2,500 kilometers? Verndari's helmet slowly turned back to Arash, tilting to the side. Humble bowman. Well, it did kill me. Arash pointed out, but it also ended the war between us and the Turans, so it was worth it in the end. Verndari grunted, turning away. I suppose that could be considered a small price to pay. I did volunteer for it. Arash shrugged. Always knew it was going to kill me. He chuckled, can't ever really expect to end a war without some sacrifice. Quote. Perhaps. Oh, he's angry. Gareth suddenly said, looking in a direction. Arash and Vrindari looked at her, the former in slight confusion before the pair turned their attention over to where she was staring, only to see Ash exit the building he and the master had entered, his face set in a stony expression. Are you sure? Arash said, he looks pretty stoic to me. Oh yeah, he's mad. Gareth nodded. Big brother Gawain used to make that face whenever he got angry. She frowned, normally when he found out I had been speaking with Sir Lancelot. I never did find out why, she muttered under her breath. So, he's angry then? Vrindari queried, how strange. I am curious as to what set him off. Well, let's find out. Gareth exclaimed, then waved the saber servant over. Hey, Sir Ash. Ash paused, turning his blank expression towards them before he strode over, his face never changing as he got to within speaking distance of the trio. Yes. You seem angry. Gareth bluntly put, tilting her head. What's wrong? Ash blinked at her, raising an eyebrow. And how could you know of my mood? Gawain made the same expression. Ash sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I fear my similar mannerism with your older brother will eventually return to haunt me. He muttered, then shook his head, but I am not angry, per se. You look pretty mad. Arash pointed out. I can actually see it now. You've got this burning anger behind your eyes, like you want to protect something. He smirked, or someone. Ash stared at him for a few moments before he clicked his tongue. We established contact with Chaldea and the sorceress Olga. She is currently in the company of Emperor Nero. Yes. Vrindari replied, still staring in Quailag's direction. The witch turned to him, then smirked before turning away. We were aware of this. She is also there, with my firekeeper. Ash added on. Firekeeper. Vrindari turned to him. Oh. I see. He nodded. I heard in the old tales that undead and their firekeepers were linked together. So what is she? Gareth gave a sly smile. Friend, servant, wife. Quote. Complicated. Ash replied, the relationship I have with the firekeeper is, nothing so simple as mere friendship, nor could we be described as lovers. Ah. Arash nodded, one of those type of things then. I get it. You're worried that she's out there and you aren't with her. Quote. There is also a caster in Rome whom I am acquainted with. Ash growled, and he is of questionable moral repute. Pontiff Sullivan of Irithyll. Arash frowned, you mentioned him before. The berserker was his servant in life. He is more than the berserker's master. He frowned, crossing his arms. He was accepted into the ranks of the Darkmoon Knights by the god Gwyndolin. He usurped the lord, poisoned him and declared himself Pontiff of Irithyll. When Aldrich arrived in the city, Sullivan offered the lord to him. As for the inhabitants of the city, he growled, Vort fate is the most pleasant that could have awaited them. And he's with her. Gareth stood up straight. No, wait. He's in Rome, right now. Apparently he's helping us. What? You just said he was some nasty mage. And he is. Ash frowned, which makes this turn of events all the more troubling for me. Ah, Arash nodded, so you want to get to Rome as fast as possible to make sure your friend is safe from him. Quote. Yes. Ash nodded. Arash and Gareth raised an eyebrow at the slight hesitation before he answered. Was there something else that troubled you? I spoke with the Emperor. Oh. Nero. Arash chuckled, surprised to learn she was a girl. So, what did she want? She wants to invite my firekeeper to her bed. Quote. Oh. Arash blinked, looking away to hide his smile. I see. Ah. Gareth pointed at him. That's the same face Gawain had whenever he got really overprotective of me. You're scared for the firekeeper's maidenhood. Wah. Ash blinked. She is a grown woman and capable of making her own decisions. Ash crossed his arms. I merely think it prudent that I arrive in Rome and ensure she is not taken advantage of. By the pit, Vrindari grumbled, pinching the bridge of his helmet nose and shaking his head. I can see we have a real emergency on our hands. Arash chuckled, best make haste to Rome. Ahahaha. Gareth openly laughed, walking up to Ash and then pat him on the shoulder. You really are overprotective of someone, aren't you? Ash crossed his arms. She does not need my protection. She is merely unaccustomed to such advances. Of course. Gareth nodded knowingly. It is the duty of a knight to protect fair maidens, is it not? I feel as though you are openly insulting me now. Don't worry, Ash. Arash spoke up in an amused tone. We'll get to Rome soon enough to protect your lady friend from the evil caster, and promiscuous emperor. He ended his sentence by devolving into an amused laugh. Ash huffed, crossing his arms and looking away from them. And, moving on, we're on the way to Rome after some lighthearted fun to break up the dreariness of the previous few chapters being, well, Aldrich-related body horrors. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 32. When in Rome. Ritska Group Pav. How far from Rome are we now? Couple hours. Aulus answered. He'd volunteered to act as their escort towards the Roman capital, primarily because he knew them and also he'd let slip that he'd rather not have to fight giant monsters for the rest of the week. Ritska nodded his head, turning to face Ash, the saber servant having returned to his helmeted feature. Likely to hide his expression. He hadn't said much during their journey, despite Gareth's insistence. Although when Ritska had asked the Lancer about it, she said that he was likely sulking and that Gawain had a habit of also going through long silences whenever he heard something he didn't like but couldn't do anything about it. Ritska, for one, found it exceedingly amusing that the undead knight who killed gods was basically brooding. When Ritska had tried to tease the servant about his firekeeper, Ash had quickly asked him what he would do if someone acted in a similar manner towards Mash. He hadn't tried to tease him again. Fujimaru. Romani called him again. How close are you to Rome? The director keeps calling me. He sighed. I like to be informed but she's really going for it. It's making me feel a little bad for her now. We're only a couple hours from Rome, Doctor. Ritska replied with a smile. You can let the director know we'll be with her soon. Okay. Romani nodded his head, visibly slumping in his chair. That's a relief, then she'll be your problem. Doctor. Mash frowned at him. The director is just a little anxious right now. So am I. He whined. I've been up here eating cake. I was so worried about you. Motherfucker. Maxwell's voice cried out. Is that why my workspace was covered in crumbs this morning? I didn't want to spill any on the rayshift equipment. Romani raised his hands, and if I ate it in my room I'd get it on my blankets and it's really hard to sweep all that up. You, Maxwell growled off screen, then the sound of something slamming into metal was heard as Romani flinched. Sorry. TCH. Doctor. Mash sighed. I thought that director told you not to eat in the command room. Well, this is the observation deck. Romani explained. It's technically not the command room. Doctor. Fine, he slumped. I can always eat my sweets, they don't leave crumbs. Ritska chuckled, shaking his head. Honestly, I think you might be eating too many sugary things. Don't we have an on-site gym? Romani blinked. Well, we do, but, he paled. Fujamru. Why you wouldn't make me go there, right? I can't actually make you do anything. Ritska stared at him. Romani let out a sigh of relief and nodded his head. The director on the other hand, he trailed off as Romani squeaked. Senpai, please don't bully the doctor. Yes. Listen to Mash. Romani nodded his head. She's such a good girl. Although he does look a little flabby. Mash. Why? Because it's a great shield. Verndari countered, it's not supposed to be mobile. So why not give her a spear then? I don't have a spear on hand. He argued, and even if I did, I am not trained in it and the only spearman we have is trained in a completely different style of combat. What about Ash? Gareth asked, looking over. Ash, can you use a spear and a great shield? I can use a spear, yes. He shrugged. I am proficient enough with most weapons, although I prefer swords. He sighed, looking over his shoulder at his great sword. This is my preferred weapon, however. Is it? Gareth blinked. What's it called? The Onyx Blade. Ash explained, although it was not mine to begin with and I can use other swords. So you have different swords. Gareth tilted her head, eyes wide in awe. I thought servants could only have one noble phantasm. From my understanding, they would all count as the same noble phantasm, due to the bottomless box containing all the weapons from my travels. He sighed, although I do not have it in my possession. Perhaps your firekeeper does. Vrindari shrugged, still, to see a bottomless box for myself. Why are they called bottomless boxes? Gareth inquired. Beatrice took this as her opportunity to speak up. Because they are, literally, bottomless. Although where they came from is actually a little debated. She shrugged. They are pretty rare though. I only ever encountered one person with the box. Where'd you get one? Quote. I was gifted it upon my entrance to Firelink Shrine. He explained with a shrug. The maiden already had one. I never inquired as to where she got one. Oh. Beatrice nodded. What else did you have in it? Arash asked. Big adventure. You must have gotten a lot of souvenirs. Armor, poisons, throwing knives, bombs, spears, pikes, halberds, axes. Ash began to list off things before Arash cut him off. I get it. How many were special weapons? Very few. Ash admitted. Most were just whatever I had scavenged off the floors or in caves. Could anyone use them? Well, I believe so. Ash shrugged. They were not bound to me. Most weapons with magical qualities were designed to be issued to soldiers. He titled his head, although the weapons I crafted from transposed souls would be different. I suspect only myself could employ their skills. Ah. Arash nodded. Sounds handy. He shook his head. Anyway, if you can fight with a spear, how come you didn't teach Mash? I never fought with a shield like that. He explained. Most of my shields were smaller than hers. It was also a case of rarely using one with a spear as well. How come you didn't fight with a shield? I would have had to sacrifice my use of the pyromancy glove. Ash explained, or use of my sword. I decided to rely on speed to fight rather than endurance. I did use shields which increased my stamina however. Although they were not what one would describe as suited for fighting dragons, or giant knights, or gods. Quote. Makes sense. Quote. So what's the biggest spear you have? Gareth asked. Ash turned to her, tilting his head to the side. For jousting, the only other spearman we have is the Hound of Ulster. And he isn't really a jouster. She paused. Astolfo might count though, she muttered to herself. Quote. I did possess a great lance. Ash gave his answer. Never used it much as for size, it was larger than I was. Perhaps the same size as your own lance. Ooh. Gareth nodded her head. Any experience in jousting? No. Shame. I could teach you. Quote. Perhaps another time. He muttered non-committally, looking away from her and back ahead. Your firekeeper still concerns you then. Vrindari stated, understandable, she is a person of import in the hands of one of dubious loyalty and another who is, impulsive with their desires. Of course I am. He sighed. I have greater faith in the chaos which to be around my firekeeper than the likes of Sullivan and this emperor. Still, Gareth muttered excitedly, I'm going to see Rome. Ancient Rome. Well, not ancient right now because we're in it but it's still Rome. She turned to Arash, aren't you excited? Well, it's a little intriguing. Arash chuckled, most summoning her in the modern era and with less at stake. He shook his head, it's my first fight for the fate of the world, that and I get to meet all sorts of interesting people. Woof. And other comrades. He added on hastily. Sif turned his snout up in seemingly a prideful way before letting out an amused snort. I still have trouble believing this is the Great Wolf of Artorias. Beatrice mumbled, he's so. They are a wolf. A prideful one admittedly, but a wolf all the same. Vrindari surmised, I would be more concerned if he did not act like a wolf. Still, you're not going to, do anything stupid when we get into Rome, are you? Gareth asked Ash, because Gawain used to be a little blunt when it came to dealing with stuff he didn't like. Ash gave her a sideways glance through his helmet before he looked away. I shall do nothing violent when we arrive. Ritska Group POV several hours later. The second they arrived in Rome, Ash walked through the gates, barely sparing the large, somewhat menacing, servant guarding it a glance before he strode through the city with purpose, virtually stomping his way into the market. Ash! Ritska called out after him, don't rush off. Jogging after his servant, you don't even know where you're going. They gave the servant pause, turning around and facing the centurion guide. Which direction are we going? Well, the legate told me the emperor placed your group in a special wing in the palace. He threw a thumb over his shoulder, not sure if she'll fit though. Ritska and Ash looked in the direction to see Quelaag in the market. Several citizens took one look at her and would have run off were it not for the small Roman entourage around her. Instead, they assumed her a prisoner. And elected to throw fruits, vegetables and anything else they could get their hands on. Through all of the pelting of objects, Quelaag maintained an expressionless gaze, her eyes not even moving in the direction of the throwers, not that anything they threw could have harmed her to begin with. Peaches splattered against her carapace and sizzled, apples were obliterated upon contact. Then a clang of metal interrupted the throwings, everyone paused. Mash glared at the man who had thrown a large rock at Quelaag's head. The woman had turned and for the briefest of moments showed genuine surprise before her expression shifted into a frown, clicking her tongue and looking away from the shielder. Mash maintained her glare at the man. Everyone else in the market had paused in their throwing to watch the staring contest between the two of them. Enough! Aulus shouted out, making his way through the market and getting between Mash and the offending citizen. The next man or woman who throws anything shall answer to me. Go about your business. He turned away from the man and looked down at Mash for a few seconds. Good reflexes. Mash blinked, seemingly realizing herself and then scratched the back of her neck. Sorry for causing a commotion. Faye. Aulus waved her off. They're scared and need someone to blame. He looked over at Quelaag. Sorry to say that you're a perfect target for them. HMPH. She grunted, as if I care. Right. Aulus nodded, then turned back to his men. What are you waiting for? The start of winter. Get a fucking move on. That jogged them into action, quickly picking up the pace and continuing to escort the servants. Mash walked alongside Quelaag, a pensive expression on her face before she looked up at the rider. Are you alright, Quelaag-san? You're an idiot. The woman coldly declared. You should have just ignored it. She looked down at Mash. Or did you believe that a mere pebble could hurt me? Mash shook her head. No. But it didn't feel right to watch them throw stuff at you. She frowned. You haven't done anything to deserve that from them. Deserve has little to do with it. Quelaag grunted. A lot of people deserve a lot of things. Doesn't mean they always get them. She shrugged. Life is unfair. Deal with it. Still, that doesn't mean someone should sit back and watch. Mash argued. Besides, I don't think you're a bad person, Quelaag-san. Your kind words are wasted, Kyrielite. Vrindari grunted as he walked past the pair. She has not the heart to accept them, nor the right to them. HMPH. Ryder scoffed. I think that's the first thing he's said you should listen to. She sneered at Mash. You shouldn't make such careless remarks. Glad that worked out. Aulus grumbled as he rejoined Ash and Ritska. I thought she was going to freak out and kill someone eventually. She has more control than that. Ash replied. Demons do not usually speak with humans. If they do, it means they have something worth saying. He turned around. Whether or not it is worth listening to is something entirely different. Ritska frowned at that, trailing after Ash as the saber servant went on ahead. I get the feeling you don't like Ryder. I don't. Ash replied immediately. It has nothing to do with her being a demon. Before you ask. He shook his head, although perhaps that is part of it. Then why? She is a witch of Izalith. He grumbled. Her and her siblings once sought to prolong the Age of Fire. It failed, miserably. She and her siblings were killed or corrupted, and from then on demons would spew forth from the city of Izalith. You hate her because she made demons? Ritska asked, then looked back at her, slightly cringing at her body in fear before his head darted back. I think she might have paid for it though. She paid for her arrogance. He replied, the payment of her sins does not detract from them, and her punishment does not absolve her of her actions. It was only because what the witches attempted failed that I do not hate her. Ritska furrowed his brows. I thought you did hate her. I don't like her. Ash reiterated, that does not mean I hate her. So, you don't hate Quelaag, but you do hate Sullivan. Yes. Oh, Ritska nodded his head. Why? Ash's head snapped to him for a few moments before it turned back. There are many reasons that I hate Sullivan. What he did, his betrayal of his sworn lord. His coup of Irithyll, his servitude to Aldrich and his cruelty. But, there is a reason I hate him that stands above all others. Quote. What is it? Ash remained silent for a few moments, and answer for another time. He eventually replied. Ritska frowned at him but nodded his head. If Ash didn't want to share right now, then he wouldn't force him to. Then again, he noticed that a lot of the servants from the other world had strong feelings, either being remarkably friendly towards each other, or outright vitriol in their emotions. Ash could go from speaking cordially with one person and then threatening death upon another. It was jarring for Ritska that someone could be so flippant in their personality. Perhaps it was a different world, but he felt as though that had little bearing on it. Cu was similar, the man was friendly enough with them, laughing and joking, but when it came to fighting, he would put his all into a fight just to kill you. It was. He turned around, focusing in on Mash. Would she turn out like that? He had trouble picturing Mash acting like Cu or Ash, where she would joke one moment and then kill people the next. And he didn't want to picture it either, imagining the girl who smiled at him and called him senpai, covered in blood with a scowl on her face, was something he found left a sick feeling in his gut. Worse, could he turn out like Ash, or any of the other servants for that matter? As smiley and happy as they all were, Ritska realized they had all killed people in their lives. You seem troubled. Aulus suddenly called out to him. I know the streets of Rome are fascinating, but trust me, kid. When you've seen one, you've seen them all. Ritska blinked. Sorry. What's on your mind? Nothing, it's just, he paused. You've killed people, right? Quote. Yeah. Aulus replied slowly. Killed quite a few people. I am a centurion. You don't really get to my rank unless you're good at killing people and telling others how to kill people. Well, he grunted, unless your father is friends with some pompous-ass senator. Right, Ritska nodded. So, how do you just, he bit his lip, how do you just ignore it? Well, if I didn't kill them, they would have probably killed me. Aulus shrugged. That's how it tends to work in armies. You gotta gut the fuckers or they're gonna gut you. If you're gonna start asking me how I smile and all that stuff, I'll just tell you this. He looked Ritska in the eyes. You just don't think about it. Or you do, depends on how you or I guess. You guess. Oh, yeah. Aulus nodded. I know a few legionnaires who'll boast about splitting some barbarian skull in the tavern and some who'll go all quiet. You get all kind of folks in the legions. My advice to you is this, if you haven't killed anyone, don't worry about it, let those of what sort that out. Oh. Ritska nodded. Let me guess. Aulus grunted. You were worried about the little girl. She ain't killed anyone yet and you're afraid of how she'll react when she does. He cringed. Am I that obvious? Yeah. The centurion nodded, but it ain't worth worrying about right now. Want to know what I think? She doesn't exactly look like some Celt warrior maiden to me, and I'm a little thankful for knowing she isn't going to rip my throat out with her teeth and use my skull as a cup. What the? Anyway, she'll probably freak out. He shrugged, seen that with some of the other recruits. They want to try their best and all that, second their face is splattered with blood they freeze up and get dead. Or they don't and they wise up. Want my advice? Make sure she's got someone around her after she kills her first, make sure she doesn't end up dead. Oh okay. Ritska nodded, then turned away. Well, aside from that. Aulus cleared his throat. Emperor's palace is just up ahead, they'll probably be expecting you. Olga Pav. Olga repeatedly tapped her foot on the ground, debating whether or not to call Romani again. She looked to her right to see Nero in a similar state of impatience. You said they would be here soon. Nero asked, frowning with her hands on her hips. Olga sighed and nodded her head. It most rude to be kept waiting when I have already been patient for so long. I beg thee patience, Emperor. Cecilia spoke in a calming tone. Milord and his quarry will arrive with haste. Quote. Nero nodded with a strained expression. I know they shall arrive soon, but it is irritating all the same. Perhaps my perception of time has slowed. Mine has, Olga muttered under her breath, then looked across to her servant. The berserker was stood in the corner, having moved there while they waited and not moved since, while some part of Olga was pleased she had a servant that would obey her every command. It was quite the blow to her pride that she had to summon a literal golem in order to actually qualify as a master. Still, There were some slivers of independent thought from the berserker, so that was at least something. The doors at the side of the room opened up. The white robes of the caster servant passed through, tilting his head when he saw the small group waiting. So, they have yet to arrive, I see. Indeed. Nero griped. It is most annoying. I'm sure. Olga got the feeling that Sullivan was rolling his non-existent eyes. Given your apparent frustration, I assume that they are within the city already. They are. The firekeeper replied to him. I can sense Milord approaching. How touching. Sullivan huffed. Then again, I have noticed that those of a similar disposition are drawn to each other. Perhaps it is your nature as slaves which links you. Do not insult Cecilia, Sullivan. Nero frowned at him. If she is a slave to anything, it is to my beauty. Olga pinched the bridge of her nose, closing her eyes and letting out a slow breath of exasperation at the tone. The antics of the emperor had gotten on her nerves for the past week, and she was grateful that Fujimaru Ritsuka and his servants were going to arrive soon. If only to get the emperor's attention away from her. There was a knock at the door. The group turned and saw the armored helm of a Praetorian push itself inside and face them. My emperor, the Chaldean entourage has arrived. Shall I bring them in? Nero exclaimed. Yes. Right away. Quickly. At once, my emperor. The man's head bowed and he ducked out. Nero was virtually giddy with excitement, her whole body vibrating in a grin threatening to split her face. The doors opened again, fully, as another group walked in. At the helm was a Roman centurion walking alongside Ritsuka and Mash. Behind him were the servants he had brought with him. Then there was Ash, was wearing his helmet which hid his expression from the group. Although Gareth was hanging around him with a rather pensive expression on her face, none of which boded well. Ah! Nero threw her arms wide. Welcome, Chaldean allies, to Rome. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the group, then fell on the armor of Ash, her mind putting two and two together. Ah! You are Cecilia's lord. Excellent. We have much to discuss. Indeed. Came Ash's reply. Yes, there is much to discuss. Sullivan spoke up, drawing Ash's attention to him and causing the saber's whole body to tense up, his fists clenching and looking like he was barely restraining himself from lashing out at the caster. Is there not? Unkindled. Ritsuka clapped his hands together, giving a strained grin. How are you, director? Fine. Why? Were you expecting something to be wrong? Olga fired back, eye twitching. No, director. Mash interjected with a reassuring expression. We were just surprised and worried that you were here. What with your condition with servants, we were afraid that you would be in danger. Olga looked at Mash and then sighed. While that would usually be true, I seem to have found an exception to the problem of affinity. Oh. Ritsuka blinked. So you were able to summon a servant too, director. He smiled at her. Congratulations. I don't need your congratulations. Olga huffed, although there was a slight tinge of red to her cheeks. Besides, Berserker is over there. She pointed off into the corner of the room. Ritsuka and Mash followed her hand, and then looked up. Ash-san, Mash called out, slightly shaky. Behind you. What? Ash blinked, tilting his helm and then turning around. Only to find himself staring at the metallic chest armor of Olga's Berserker. His head trailed up until he was staring into the helm of the Dragon Slayer armor. The larger Berserker glaring down at him. Ash blinked, noticing the servant had somehow snuck up on the group. He's, big. I think he's the same size as the one at the gates. Gareth followed up. I've never heard of anything like this though. Thy eyes gaze upon the armor of a dragon slayer. Cecilia called out, although the owner is long departed. A suit of armor then. Vrindari surmised. King Vendrick performed similar feats in Drangolic. He crossed his arms, nodding his head approvingly, although they were less physically intimidating. I'll say, Beatrice muttered, stepping away from the giant servant. Bah, this is too formal. Nero whined. Come, I shall lead you to your embassy. Embassy? Ritsuka asked dumbly, completely ignorant to Olga's growing look of horror and embarrassment. We have an embassy, Emperor. Nero beamed. I have called your group the Pale Rose Delegation. As such you shall receive an embassy worthy of this title. Pale Rose Delegation. Mash blinked at the title. Olga was now bright red and holding her hands up to cover her face. I have named it after your leader. She is a pale flower, is she not? Ritska looked like he wanted to say something, then Olga's head snapped up and her eyes met his. Her face was awash with anger, embarrassment and the promise of pain if he made a comment on it. He bit his lip and looked like he was struggling to contain his laughter. Soler Pav. I suspect that the Chaldeans will be in Rome by now. Soler muttered, casting a glance at the moon and then frowning. It was unusually bright tonight, something about that felt off about him. Prefect. Magnus called out to him as he approached the knight, moving along the walls. The legate has requested to know how many men you will require to shore up the defenses, as well as if you will require anyone for scouting parties. Soler nodded his head. A minor gripe he had with his position was the paperwork, it never seemed to end. Very well. Soler replied, then looked back over the wall. You should probably get some rest, Centurion, I believe we might need it. I'll take you up on that, Prefect. The man chuckled, rubbing his eyes. It looks like the monsters won't bother us tonight, they'd have usually attacked by now. Perhaps, Soler murmured, although I would almost prefer they did. They were predictable, this lull in the violence. He crossed his arms, then jerked his head suddenly, staring off into the distance at something. Centurion. Put the city on high alert. Now, he ordered, hand going to his sword. The man blinked. Pref. Quickly. Soler shouted, ripping his sword free from its scabbard and manifesting his shield. Move. Aye, Prefect. Magnus nodded, then sprinted off, his shouts of alarm echoing across the city wall. They were quickly followed by horn blasts, signaling the Roman soldiers to prepare for combat. Soler narrowed his eyes in the distance, he could feel it approaching, but he couldn't see it. It was below him, but how much below could it? His eyes widened as his vision trailed to the ground, the grass abruptly split open as hundreds of spiders came pouring out. Soler prepared himself to throw miracles at them when the hole they had emerged from widened. A glowing blade pushed its way out of the ground, swiftly followed by its owner. The horrific abomination of a cruel mix between man and horse made even the accursed he had fought earlier look tame. The creature, standing nearly 20 feet tall, threw its head back and let loose a wailing scream before it raised its sword above its head, grasping it with two hands as the blade began to glow an eerily brighter blue. Soler widened his eyes in realization as he saw where it was aiming. Get off the walls. He shouted, go. Prepare to retreat. He threw himself off the wall into the ground. Moments before a pillar of light shot from the blade and into the air, the creature screamed out a word before it brought the blade down, the blue beam of light shattering the outer wall and several buildings, sending charged debris and causalities in all directions and leaving a gaping burning hole where the gate had been. Soler raised his head just in time to see the creature come barreling into the city, an army of spiders trailing behind it. And, as you have no doubt guessed, the foreigner servant is Ludwig. I'll include his stats below. Ludwig, the Holy Blade. Servant, foreigner. Strength, B, A+. Endurance, C, A. Agility, C, D. Mana, D. Luck, C. Noble Phantasm, A+. Mondlicht, A+. Anti-army, max target, 400 to 500, max range, 0 to 50. Release a wave of moonlight energy towards foes. Is significantly more powerful under the moon. Ludwig, the accursed, A+, anti-unit self. An unsightly beast, a great terror looms. Ludwig the accursed is coming. Strength and endurance are boosted while agility is degraded as his body becomes that of a beast. Class skills. Mad enhancement. A. Existence outside the domain. B. Divinity. E. Traces from use of the old blood. Personal skills. True mentor. B. Moonlight Greatsword grants similar skill to Mind's Eye Fake. Thread of light. C. Can see connections, or causes of mental interference. Is also difficult to mentally corrupt his mind. First Hunter of the Church. A. Grants insight into dealing with non-human foes, or individuals with the mark of a beast upon them. Chapter 33. Sun Under the Moon. Soler Pav. The Knight of Sunlight grit his teeth as the luminescent greatsword slammed into his weapon. Bluish magical energy shot out in all directions with the clash as Soler felt his legs buckle under the strength and weight of the blade. He had foregone his shield. Against this opponent it would do no good. Whatever this beast was, it had strength on its side and his shield would only serve to hamper his movements when engaging the foe, thus he held his straight sword in two hands. The man-made horse monster leered down at him with a growl, then pushed the blade through his guard. Solaire grunted as greatsword slammed into the dirt in front of him. He kicked himself back as the monster advanced, reversing its grip on the blade as it charged. Solaire widened his eyes in realization and rolled to the side just in time to avoid the blade. The beast having slashed upwards at him, however, that was not all it did. An arc of green energy was released, cutting through the air and slamming into a building with an explosion of power. The shockwave sent dozens of men flying in all directions, either dead or wounded. All around the night was chaos. The Roman legionnaires were quick to get to arms, having already been on alert from the repeated attacks, however their tactics were better suited for fighting men. Not monsters. The spiders flung themselves at the soldiers, ripped their shields from them and tearing then men asunder. Those that didn't quickly found their large eagle-shaped shields did little to fight off the spiders, their armored legs shattering them or puncturing the wood and then the armor. It was a slaughter in every sense of the word. Retreat. Vespasian's voice cut through the chaos. Retreat to the far gate. Burn the houses. Fire is their weakness. Solaire was grateful that the man had taken his advice to heart, although he currently wasn't in a position to express it. He dashed forwards, ducking under another swing and slicing his blade into the closest leg. The beast howled in rage at the wound Solaire had given him, although he notes that despite having chopped into flesh, the monster had skin as tough as steel. It was like fighting the gargoyles again, only they weren't quite as skilled at swordplay. The blue blade glowed again as the monster swung downwards towards the knight. He wasn't looking to be hit with one of those and threw his body to the side, the ground being scorched by the wave of energy. As he got back to his feet, the beast slammed the tip of its sword into the ground, just under its right arm and then charged with frightening speed, clearing the distance between the two of them in mere moments, cutting a burnt trench through the ground as it approached him. Solaire raised his sword again and manifested his shield. He wouldn't be able to avoid the attack in time, so his best bet was, unfortunately, to tank the blow. The beast swung the blade upwards towards Solaire as the knight held his shield up. The blow slammed into him and pressed the shield into his chest as a burst of light filled his vision. The next moment, he found himself sailing through the air and crashing through the roof of a nearby building. He groaned as he pushed himself up off the floor. Rays of moonlight shining through the large hole in the ceiling where he had fallen revealed the remains of a dining table. The knight grimaced and turned his attention back to the direction he had flown from. Just in time to see the horizontal arc of bluish-green energy come streaking towards him, obliterating the house just in front of him as it sped in his direction. Solaire widened his eyes in alarm and ducked down just as the energy slammed into the building he was in, the top half being wrenched free from the lower half and launched in all directions in a shower of bricks and wood. Solaire pushed himself up just in time to see the giant creature come charging towards him, slashing at the air and throwing more waves of energy at him. He grit his teeth behind his helm, dematerializing his shield and pulling out his talisman, rubbing it along his blade and electrifying it. He slashed at the closest beam, splitting it in half and dissipating it before tilting his body to the side to avoid the second one, the attack just barely singeing the front of his armor before he charged the servant. The beast let loose a challenging roar as it heft the blade above its head and slammed it down. Solaire rolled to the side as the weapon made impact. Although the beast showed a greater amount of intelligence than Solaire would have liked as it adjusted its grip on the blade and turned it sideways so the edge now faced him and slashed towards him, Solaire raised his own sword to block the strike, gritting his teeth as the force of the blow cratered the ground beneath his feet. With a cry of exertion, Solaire pushed the blade up and thrust towards the wrist of the beast, catching its free hand and puncturing the arm. Lightning flew from his blade and scorched sections of dark rotten skin. The smell of burning flesh soon filled the air as the monster let loose a horrific cry of rage and pain, then jerked its wrist free, snarling down at him. Solaire grinned behind his helmet, then moved to attack when he noticed something that made his non-functioning heart skip a beat. He could see the creature's breath. Worse than that, he could feel a chill in the air, which could only mean that. The roar of Vort soon filled the air. Solaire kicked off the ground and into the air, turning his body back to the ruins of the gate just in time to see the frozen knight come charging through, throwing his head back and letting loose another scream. On the far side of the city, Romans were continually pouring out of the gate in a frenzy, throwing torches at the buildings or at the spiders, which worked to scare most of them off as they retreated. The calls of Vespasian were mostly drowned out by the panicked cries of the soldiers or the sounds of battle as the rearguard worked to cover their retreat. In the chaos, none of them noticed a man, garbed in a long black leather coat, wielding a large jagged steel cleaver with segments running through it, enter the city, a black mask covering the lower half of his face and a triangular black hat atop his head. Dark eyes were singularly focused on something ahead of him. The man pushed aside Roman soldiers as he marched through the city, in the same direction that Soler and the servants were fighting. Chaldean group Pav. How long have they been in there? Ritska asked Mash. The pair could still hear the raised voices of Ash and Nero from the next room over, arguing over the firekeeper. Several hours, Senpei. Mash diligently reported, while a hint of exasperation could be seen in her eyes, which Olga made no attempt to conceal. The woman was slumped in her chair, looking exceedingly tired as the muffled argument continued. Sif was lying on the ground near the group, something which brought amusement to Gareth's face as Fu was sat atop the wolf's head, the saber servant showing no hint of caring about his passenger. Must you glare at me? Quelaag huffed, clicking her tongue and looking over at Sullivan. The caster was sat on the same table as Olga, arms propped on the table and head resting in his right hand, his index finger repeatedly tapping on the side of his head as he stared in Quelaag's direction. I'm merely curious is all. He responded, reading about the witches of Izalith is one thing, to see one for myself is quite another. I suppose I should feel honored that I'm in the presence of such an accredited pyromancer. The sarcasm in his voice was barely audible, yet it was tinged with just enough of it to become even more insulting. Quelaag clicked her tongue and rolled her eyes. Oh. And where did you read about my family then? The archives of Honor Londo made for light reading, was the vague answer she received, although you were barely a footnote. Perhaps they were embarrassed of the fiasco that another wielder of a Lord's soul caused. The writer narrowed her eyes. I'm glad you found my family's disfiguration such interesting reading. Yes, I'm sure that you would find facing the consequences of your own actions most vexing. He cooed, then turned his head towards the woman dressed in rags stood in the corner and tilted his head. The tapping stopped. You are a sorcerer, yes. Huh. Beatrice blinked at being addressed then fidgeted on the spot. Well, the sorcerers of Vinheim wouldn't call me that. Actually I'm a witch. Oh. A heretic then. Sullivan bluntly described, causing her to flinch. You did yourself a favor. The courts of Vinheim were full of sycophants and prideful dullards. Beatrice blinked then tilted her head, furrowing her brows. Were you trained in Vinheim? Ha! That actually got a laugh from the pontiff, which made her cringe as it sounded like grinding wood. Hardly. I visited the school once out of fleeting curiosity. No, I would be considered a heretic as well. He turned his head to look away from her. Although I suspect that does not relate to why I find myself under the rather hostile gaze of a knight. I have little patience for oathbreakers. Verndari seethed, especially for ones who killed their own liege lord. Oh. I see the Ashen One had rather unflattering remarks to make about me. Sullivan surmised, although I did not kill Gwyndolin, I merely poisoned him, Aldrich did the rest. If you are to accuse me, ensure that you are correct in your facts. Semantics. Verndari dismissed. You betrayed your oath and abandoned him to his fate, you may as well have ended his life yourself. Betrayal of my oath implies I ever held true to it to begin with. Sullivan chuckled, then turned away and furrowed his wooden brows as he found Quelaag staring at him with an indiscernible expression. What is with that odd look you direct at me? You, she paused, creasing her brows, you aided in the death of Gwyndolin. Were you close? No. Ah, you must be surprised to learn that he was felled by simple poison. He chuckled, despite my claim to caster, I could just as easily rank as an assassin. How did you even enter his service? Quelaag sounded more perplexed than anything else. You look just as much a freak as I. Castor manifested a steel sword in his hands. It released a subtle glow as he waved it over his body. Several blinked as in the place of a humanoid tree, now sat a rather average-looking man with a black stubbly beard and gray eyes. Chameleon spells are rather more useful than given credit for, and Gwyndolin was arrogant to believe he was the only one skilled in physical deception. You! Beatrice virtually exclaimed, pointed at the pontiff with a disbelieving expression. The caster raised an eyebrow at her. You used your sword as a catalyst. Yes. The caster replied, smirking as he stared down at the weapon. Despite the sorcery school teaching individuals to wield enough power to tear a man asunder, they considered my practice of turning a sword into a catalyst to be barbaric. They would much rather do their killing at a distance. A scoff escaped his mouth as he waved the sword in the air again, dissipating the illusion and astralizing the blade. Rather set in their traditions. Quote. Wow, Beatrice muttered to herself. I didn't know you could do that. So you are Ash San's friend? Mash asked the firekeeper. The woman turned her head and seemingly titled it in confusion. Ash San. She parroted the name, mouth curling into a confused frown. Ah. Ritska blinked, then chuckled. She means Ash. The San at the end is an honorific. I understand. The firekeeper smiled and nodded. I see Milord Ashen One has taken a name of his own. Well, Mash blinked, then scratched the back of her neck. He didn't really have a name, so I thought I could help and I made the suggestion. I am most grateful then, Lady Mash. Cecilia bowed her head. To think that Milord has been granted a name is most pleasing to me. So, you're his friend? Ritska asked. He seemed very worried about you. Milord Ashen. She paused, then released a soft laughter that made even Ritska's heart skip a beat. The boy released a small breath and realized why the Emperor was enamored with the woman. She was dangerous and not in the traditional sense. Milord Ash has always been protective of me. He is Milord. Quote. So are you friends? Quote. Friends. The woman paused. He is Milord and I am his firekeeper. Although he did not treat me as such. Thou would find he has always treated me with kindness. He's quite passionate. Ritska looked back at the doors, cringing but realizing that only Archer had the senses to actually hear what was being said through the doors. Although quite why the man was smirking, looking like he was on the verge of laughter, and shaking his head was a mystery to him. I know she's kind. That's why I don't want her taken advantage of. I would never. Cecilia would be the prize flower to accentuate my beauty. She is my firekeeper. Not your newest shiny helmet. Helmet. How brutish. To compare dear Cecilia to an ugly lump of metal. Do you have no appreciation for beauty? Approach. I am aware of her naturally attractive features. Like her cute button nose and smooth skin. Then she smiles and you feel like you can tackle the rest of the day. And her laugh, which is akin the singing of the gods. Exactly. Which is why she must remain as my flower. No. She's like my, It doesn't matter. You can't have her. Why? Most mysterious indeed. Milord had few respites in his journey, Cecilia explained. I provided comfort as best I could. Quote. You guys aren't, together, right? Senpai. Mash scolded him, an aghast look on his face that made him flinch. You shouldn't ask personal questions like that. Ah. Ritska blinked, eyes going wide and waving his arms in front of him. And no. I didn't mean to be rude or something. Thou have caused no offense. Cecilia calmed the pair. Thou speak of romance. Milord is, her smile turned sadder. Milord has smiled around you, yes. Ash. Ritska, then mulled it over in his head. Yeah, I've seen him smile a few times. He actually gets along well with some of our other servants. Quote. Did thou see the smile he had when he spoke with myself? Quote. Yeah. Ritska nodded, then furrowed his brows. It seemed more genuine. Milord is, she exhaled, all unkindled lesser when they are risen. Milord and his kin were made to kindle the first flame, that was their purpose. Therefore, Milord is less than human. Whoa, that's a little. Milord exaggerates greatly what he feels. Quote. What? Milord emotions are muted, he confessed that he inflates what he feels. She turned her head towards the muffled shouts. Anger comes to Milord easily though, above all other feelings. Inflates, Mash frowned, but he laughs with Sigward San, Siyu San and Arash San. Milord seems to have gotten better. Cecilia admitted, however, I suspect Milord acts in such a way as he would feel I would like. She shook her head. "Milord is concerned of little else, but would not believe me when I said such things did not matter to me." Quote. Jiminy Cricket. Ritska muttered under his breath, furrowing his brows and staring at the caster servant in a new light. "You're his conscience." Conscience. The woman tilted her head as the word echoed around her and then nodded. "Milord relied upon me to bring out the best in him." "Oh," Mash muttered sadly, turning her gaze to the sound of muffled shouting, "he doesn't want to lose you. Milord has always been overprotective." Ash exhaled, resting his head in his hands, and he and Nero panted for breath. He eventually looked up at her. "I will not relinquish her. Not without her permission." "And if she should agree?" Nero asked with a raised eyebrow, crossing her arms. Ash was grateful that his helmet was on and hid the way his expression turned fearful for a few moments before he sighed. Quote. She is free to make her own choices. He crossed his arms, then shook his head. "We have spent enough time with this argument already." Nero nodded, then followed him as the pair returned back into the dining room. The collective eyes of the entire Chaldean group turned to them. "Finished your quarrel, have you?" Quelaag huffed from the corner of the room, a smirk on her face. Nero stared at the woman as if realizing she was there for the first time, blinking for a few moments as she studied the spider woman and then shook her head. "A pity for your lower half, you are quite pretty otherwise." "What the? And yes," Nero went on, "we have reached an agreement." She turned to Cecilia and then shook her head. "It seems you will not be in my garden just yet." Ash's head snapped to her in clear surprise. Nero laughed and turned to him. "After hearing how devoted she has been to you for weeks now, I realize I may have to concede this victory to you. Unfortunate and saddening as it is. Perhaps it is for the best. Dear Cecilia would have to compete with my beauty after all." Quote. "I see." Ash nodded his head slowly. He really didn't and had very little clue what was going on. "Now that we have circumnavigated whatever fiasco that was." Sullivan cleared his throat, garnering the room's attention. "Perhaps it would be best if we formulated some strategy." Romani's face popped up on a blue screen from Ritska's communicator. "Caster is right. As funny as this is, we do have a mission to complete." Sullivan turned his head to stare at the doctor. "Who is this idiot?" "Wah!" Romani sputtered and then groaned. "Why does every singularity have a servant that just insults me for no reason?" "Mash. You're still a good girl. You won't do that, right?" "Doctor, you are embarrassing yourself right now." Mash cringed. "Please stop." The dragon-slaying armor nudged Olga's shoulder. The woman jerked slightly, then registered that the room had finally retained some semblance of order to it before she blinked and shook her head. "Yes, right." She sent a small nod to her servant and then looked back to the room. "We need to understand our position herein. We can do that tomorrow." Nero interrupted her with a wave of her hand. "You are all tired and it is already dark outside. I need my beauty sleep, and while none of you could compare to me, you would all do well to have a similar rest." Olga's head fell into her hands and she screamed into her palms. The Dragon Slayer armor pat her on the back in a rather amusing fashion using only a single large finger. Solar Pav. The Sunlight Warrior let out a pained gasp as Vort's mace struck his chest, sending him hurtling through the air and slamming into a building. He slid down the wall, coughing as he tried to push himself to his feet. His eyes darted over to the side just in time to see the great sword of the second servant come slicing through the air towards him. He widened his eyes in alarm and raised his sword to block the strike, succeeding in the action but also sending himself soaring through the air a second time and crashing headfirst into the dirt. He pushed himself back to his feet, rolling away as Vort slammed his mace down where Solar's head had been moments prior. The knight ripped his talisman from his belt and pulled it back. The chime of a bell rang in the air as a spear of sunlight formed in his hands, and at barely a few meters distance, he hurled it into Vort's face. The frozen knight screamed in pain as lightning arced through his metal helm, burning sections of it hand causing his free hand to claw at his face. Solar allowed himself a small smile before he returned his shield to his hands. The second beast approached him with its sword prepared in a backhanded strike. Solar struck just before the weapon made contact, parrying the blow upwards and rushing forwards at the same time, thrusting his straight sword into the midsection of the servant. Whatever the beast was, it wailed in pain before it jerked its body back, pulling Solar's sword free from its chest and lashing out with the sword again. Solaire blocked the first blow and parried the second. Then raised his shield again as his instincts cried out in alarm, just in time for Vort to slam his weapon into the block, sending him skating back along the ground. He lowered his shield and watched as the two large servants reorientated themselves, eyes focusing back on him. He grit his teeth, preparing to. A crack of sound like thunder caught his ears as something sped across the open and slammed into the larger beast's side. The monster screamed in pain as whatever it was opened up a hole in his body and sent parts of his lower torso flying in several directions. Solaire blinked in shock. The trio of servants turned their attention to the direction of the explosion of sound. Atop a building, was a man in a lock black leather coat. Strapped to his left arm, was long black tube. The open end was smoking from some kind of explosion. Then a gruff voice of the man called out, "Best pay attention, Master Knight. Beasts aren't so easily slain." He threw the weapon off his arm. It dissipated into motes of light as he jumped down. The large segmented clear in his right hand split open to reveal it was, in fact, multiple sharpened blocks of metal held together by chain. The second the man hit the ground, he clicked the weapon and spun it in front of him, killing the dozen spiders that were around him and sending their remains shooting off in all directions. The man darted forwards until he stood next to Solaire. The knight could just about make out the darkness of his eyes through the subtle glow of the fire in the town and moonlight. "I must thank you for your timely assistance." Solaire spoke, readying his sword and shield as the monster servants in front of them prepared themselves again. The man grunted, the weapon in his grip snapped and the segments formed a large cleaver once again. "Aid on a hunt is always welcome." He tensed himself, but were at a disadvantage. "I find myself agreeing with you." Solaire nodded. "I can provide a distraction for our escape." "Good." The man nodded, eyes flicking over to the spiders that were now approaching them from all directions. Solaire breathed in, then thrust his sword to the air in front of him. A glowing ball of light appeared at the tip of his blade. The dawn rises again. The light of the Father shines strong. He griped the sword with both hands, shooting forwards and slamming his heel into the ground, spinning his whole body, and he swung the glowing in an arc towards the servants as they charged. It is most grossly incandescent. "Luminous sun!" he cried out as he swung it. The light of the blade rushed forwards in a burning wave of fire. Solaire and his new ally didn't stick around to see if it had any effect other than vaporizing the street as they both span on their heels and sprinted away in the opposite direction. Solaire peeked over his shoulder just in time to see a blizzard explode outwards through the haze of flames. "Through the gate," the man ordered, snapping his blade out to the side and crushing a nearby spider. As the pair passed through, the man spun around, the large black tube appearing on his arm again and aimed up at the gatehouse. He pressed a switch on the weapon and his arm jerked backwards as a steel ball was launched forth with an explosion from the tube, slamming into the wall and sending debris tumbling downwards and cutting off the spiders from pursuit as the city burned. "We'd best hurry, Master Knight." The man grunted. Solaire was inclined to agree as they both sped off in the direction that the Romans had fled in. "My thanks for your aid, good sir." Solaire nodded to him as they ran. "I confess, I might have been in a bit of a bother there." "More than you know." The man replied in a gruff voice, saw that light miles away, wasn't expecting the other beasts. "Ah, you were hunting the rather gruesome demon then." "Demon, hey." The man released a bitter chuckle, if only it were. "I see." The saber servant nodded. "Well, I am Solaire of Astora, adherent to the Lord of Sunlight." "Just a passing hunter." The man replied. "Lucian." "Well met, Sir Lucian." "HMPH, never seen a knight before." The man grunted, sending a sideways glance at Solaire and looked him up and down. "W'er, better at fightin' beasts than I thought." "Ah, such things were quite common in Lordran." Solaire chuckled, although maybe not quite that skilled, I suppose. "HMPH. Still, if it is aid you offer, I would be most pleased to accept." He sighed, "and I fear we that this will get worse." "You've got no idea." Lucian murmured darkly under his breath. "Chaldean group Pav." Ritska grunted as he sat down on his bed, taking off his shoes with a groan. He'd been sleeping in tents on the ground for the past few days and he was more than grateful for a proper bed. Maybe now he would get a pretty decent nigh. There was a knock on his door. He groaned, placing his head in his hands before he looked up. "Come in." He called out, the wooden door opened and he instantly felt his heart rate go up. Pontiff Sullivan strode into his room, closing the door behind him. You seem tense. Master from beyond. The caster observed staring down at Ritska's shaky expression. I suppose that the Unkindled has regaled you with many more stories about me than I expected. He went on, voice tinged with amusement as Ritska gave a shaky nod. He gulped. Well, he said you served a guy who ate people so. He trailed off when Sullivan stared down at him in silence. Even without eyes he felt like the man was glaring at him. Serve is a term I would use loosely when related to Aldrich. Sullivan grunted, moving over a small chair in the corner of the room and sitting himself down, and his habits were his alone. I did not partake in his pastimes. All right. Ritska nodded. So, what can I do for you? Nothing. Sullivan replied. I doubt you can do much. But, perhaps there is one thing. What has the Unkindled told you about where he is from? Not much. Ritska shrugged. It was filled with monsters. He was risen to do something. I see. Sullivan nodded. Did you know his firekeeper has eyes? Okay. You do not understand the significance of that, do you? Sullivan chuckled. How amusing your ignorance is. All firekeepers, no matter their origin, are blind or crippled in some other sense. The only one I was aware of who was not blind was a Darkmoon Knight and a fanatic in her devotion. They had her name written down in the corner of a book. Another small chuckle, amusing, centuries of duty to lords who caused her own suffering, and her rewards for her service is a short addendum in a single book. Ritska blinked, not knowing how to respond to that before he furrowed his brows. If she has eyes, why does she wear that, he gestured to his own eyes, mask? Because I suspect they are a recent addition. Sullivan surmised, firekeepers were forbidden from having eyes because it was feared they would use their sight to see a world without fire and abandon their purpose of tending to the flame. Okay. Ritska nodded, so why does she have them? Why indeed? Sullivan chuckled. All Unkindled work towards linking the flame, and should they succeed, they are elevated to the position of Lord of Cinder, and rest until they are awakened to link the flame once more. Alright, so, your Unkindled friend, is not a Lord of Cinder. Ritska furrowed his brows, but Ash said he saved their world. Did he now? Sullivan mused. Has he told you he hated me? Yes. Did he say why? He said you betrayed your king and tortured a city. Excuses. Sullivan waved him off. Tortured, hollows in all but name. But your Unkindled friend likely hates me for one simple reason. He leaned forwards and Ritska got the distinct impression he was smiling. He hates me, because he agrees with me. What does that? The door to his room slammed open. Ash stormed in, pointing his sword at the caster. I knew I sensed your foul stench here. He growled, get away from my master before I decide to forego any goodwill. Your master. Sullivan chuckled, standing up and turning around to face him. If I recall, the flame was your last master. How dutifully did you obey that one? Ash's grip on his weapon tightened. I will not ask a third time. Leave. Such hostility towards me. Sullivan's shoulders relaxed, but I suppose conflict will do me no good. Still, you had best educate your master, Unkindled one. It would be preferable for him to at least be aware of what you are before you betray him. Were his parting words as he disappeared. Ash growled at his retreating figure and looked as if he was going to strike the servant in the back. Ash. Ritska blinked. Are you? You would be better off sleeping in the same room as Mash. Ash cut him off. It would provide you with some protection should he come skulking. Now Han. For now. Ash sighed. I shall stand guard should he return. He moved to the door, closing it behind him. Good night, Ritska. The master blinked and then furrowed his brows in concern. He would have questioned his servant further, but he felt a yawn bubble its way out of his throat before he lay back down on his bed. Whatever it was, it could wait until the morning. Sullivan, professional shit stirrer. But anyway, as some of you have seen, we've got a second edition in the Singularity. But don't fret, he won't be here long. Only as long as Ludwig is here, then his master shall call him away again. But anyway. Sullivan dialogue. Summoning. I am Sullivan, Pontiff of Anor Londo. I have answered you call. So, do you stand against stagnation, Summoner? Dialogue 1. You dawdle too much for my liking. I dislike waiting. Dialogue 2. A master-servant relation. You are my summoner, not my master. Do not forget that again. Dialogue 3. I am mixed blood. Born to a tree spirit and I see no reason to hide my true form now. I cowered long enough in Gwendolyn's court. Dialogue 4. If you have divine spirits. Arrogant beings they are. It seems their true nature does not change regardless of world they exist upon. Although, it is amusing to see their era was cut short. Dialogue 5. If you have Jean Alter. A saint who worshipped her Lord, driven to such a fate where she rejects his existence and love. She is the fleeting dream of a madman, but that does not make it any less beautiful to see. Dialogue 6. If you have Ashen One. I've seen the unkindled one around, do I hate him? My feelings on the matter are more complicated than hatred. For decades I worked to end the age of fire, then he undid my grand work and slew me. Only to end it himself. I do not know to rage that all my work was undone by mere ash who betrayed his purpose for existence, or laugh at the irony of it all. Dialogue 7. If you have Gwendolyn. I have seen the glares he sends my way. Arrogance of the highest order if he believed there would be no retribution for his actions. Dialogue 8. If you have Nameless King. He dislikes me for betraying his brother, despite the fact he betrayed his father. I suspect he harbors more hatred for his brother's death than anything else. Dialogue 9. If you have Aldrich. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep. Despite whatever you may believe about our relationship, he was a blunt instrument. I required a means to secure the end of the Age of Fire and Aldrich provided. Our goals coincided. Nothing more. Dialogue 10. If you have Gilgamesh. He is the one who ended the Age of Gods. A divine birth with the purpose of solidifying it, brings about its end. It would amuse me if he did not have the gods' arrogance, but it is an act worthy of my acknowledgement regardless. Dialogue 11. If you have completed Lostbelt 7. I have never met him, never heard of him. Yet, when he looks at me, I feel a connection. As if remembering a friendship that did not exist. He holds that disappointment that I am not who he knew, but the fact he continues to approach me is not aggravating. Dialogue 12. If you have Morgan. That berserker glares at me frequently, apparently my nature and presence is vexing to her. More so to be as she proclaimed herself queen of the fairies which, apparently, includes myself. I don't even know what a fairy is. Dialogue 13. If you have Sister Freed. Sister Freed. I was not expecting your presence here. No, I did not. Yes, you were right. I was disappointed in what lay beyond the painting. Dialogue 14. If you have Ganesha. What do you want, God? I have no time for my noble phantasm. What? The clone of what? I am standing right now, what do you even? What is stand power? What drivel spews from your mouth? Likes. I have actions I approve of and actions I disapprove of. But if you must know, progression. In all things. Hates. Stagnation, to watch a world grind to a halt and advance no further. To see the denizens of the land accept the frozen society they live in. To allow such a thing, it is deplorable. Wish for the Holy Grail. I would rather force fate with my own hands than rely upon anything with the title of holy in it. Bond Level 1. You prove useful so far, Summoner, and it clear our goals coincide for the moment. Blonde Level 2. I was born in the painted world of Oriental. If you wished to learn of a true hell, it was that place. Where hope dies. Blonde Level 3. For one to be born in a world of nothing and have aspirations is a curse. You would gaze upon your surroundings and see failure after failure, lost souls who strived for nothing. To lose everything implies you had something. To be born with nothing in the land of despair, means you can never gain anything. Bond Level 4. I left the painted world, journeying to the land of Lothric. Could you even fathom the rage I felt? The painted world and the real world. They were both stagnant. I saw a world where gods clung onto the dregs of power that were left and dragged the whole world with them into their decadent life. It was a land that could become something, if only there was a way to remove the obstacles. Bond Level 5. That is what I determined to do. If none would change the world, then I would take the role unto myself. I devoted everything to that goal. I would end the Age of Fire with my own hands. For that goal, I poisoned Gwyndolin, took Orithil, allowed Aldrich refuge in Anor Londo and crafted knights to prevent all who would kindle the flame again from succeeding. And at the very end, even my will was not enough. Birthday. Quote. Your life progresses. That is something. During an event. We should make ready. I sense some festival. First ascension. I can feel my power grow. Yes, this will do nicely. Second ascension. My swords. Yes, the profaned greatsword and the sword of judgment. It glows because that is my insult to the Darkmoon Knights. Third ascension. No, they are not wings. I cannot fly, merely use them to glide through the air. Fourth ascension. I am at my most powerful now. Perhaps this time my goal will be realized, the world will progress.